Okay, everybody, let's get started. So welcome to the March 2016 Q&A webinar for 101 Mixing Tricks. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to try to answer all of your questions. And let's start off with the very first one. Oh, before we get to that, I want to tell you that there's a dedicated 101 Mixing Tricks Facebook group. And it's a closed group. You must be a member of 101 Mixing Tricks in order to actually get in to see any of the comments and also to post yourself. But it's very active. There's a lot going on. So if you're not on, I encourage you. The only thing is, since I look at all of the people that asked to become a member of that group, and we screen everybody because you have to have been 101 Mixing Tricks member first. So if I don't recognize your name because you have a different screen name for your Facebook page, then just let me know. Send me an email, drop me something, and I'll be happy to add you. Okay. Oh, and where do you find it? Just do a search for 101 Mixing Tricks group and you'll find it on Facebook. The URL is really long and really, unless you can copy it, it doesn't do you much good. Okay, let's get to our very first question here from Sydney. Should I make my mixes loud to get a commercial master? Yes and no. If you're going to go to mastering, you're going to have a mastering engineer perform his magic, then don't worry about the volume. Just get the best mix you can, because the mastering engineer will make it competitively loud. That being said, if you're not going to mastering, and a lot of people don't anymore, they do self-mastering or EDM. A lot of times everything is so loud they don't really need mastering. Then, of course, you want to make it as loud as possible. Easier said than done. You can get it in a ballpark, that's for sure. The mastering engineers have their little tricks in order to get it louder than everybody else, but it's not that much louder when it's all said and done. So use some of the tricks in module 1 to give yourself a good loud mix. A couple more people just joined us. Jason, hello Jason. Hans Eric, all the way from Norway. Hey guys. So here's the next question from Peter. What I really want to learn is the FL Studio and how to get the best out of it. Also advice on certain gears to have in my studio for, I don't know what that is, a basement studio. I want to take it into the limelight. How do I do that? Okay, that's a lot there, Peter. Okay, the best way to learn FL Studio, go to lynda.com, and I'm pretty sure that there's an FL Studio course that you can take there. And all of the courses on lynda.com are awesome. I have to say, they really take a lot of pride in getting great people to give them, to develop them, and to create them. And I have to say, they're just wonderful. That's the best way to do it. I have a lot of courses on lynda.com. There's a really good mixing course there you might want to check out. Okay, next question. He says, also advice on certain gears to have in my studio. You know, it depends. I'm really surprised at how little you can get by with in studios these days and really make great competitive mixes and even hits. It depends on your budget. If you don't have a big budget, it doesn't really matter anymore, because there is gear that will work regardless of your budget. So the best thing I can say is, if you're going to do a lot of recording, then get a great signal chain microphone, mic preamp, spend your money on that. And if you're not, and also monitors are, you know, really big things. So get the best monitors you can. That's the best place to start. And I want to take it into the limelight. How do I do that? Well, yeah, we can't answer that just in a Q&A webinar. It depends on so much. It depends on your music. First of all, it has to be music that people want and can identify with. Then you have to find that audience after you make the music. And the best thing I can say is be very active on social media. There's a lot of good courses online that will help you with that. Rick Barker has a great course. And let's see who, as a matter of fact, if you want to deal on one of Rick Barker's courses, he was just on my podcast this week. So check out BobbyOwnerCircle.com. Look at my podcast, and you'll see a link that you can go and get his social media for music. And that's a great place to start. Okay, number 2. From David, concerning EQing to make all instruments fit or work together, do you EQ instruments based on what is or isn't already there frequency-wise, or do you EQ the sweet spots of the instruments, then add or subtract based on the voice or instrument you're EQing? Well, again, there's no one size that fits all here, David. The the best way to do it is that I've found it's a mix, and you're trying to make all the instruments that you have fit together. So the best thing you can do is just solo one instrument against another, make sure you can hear everything, and go through that first to make sure everything you can hear with clarity. And through that, you'll usually make everything sound really good together. So you'll be adding EQ as you need it, you'll be subtracting it as you need it. So that's the best way. It takes some time because you're going to be just soloing up 2 instruments at a time. One of the things that you probably shouldn't do unless you have a lot of experience is solo one instrument and EQ it. Because if it sounds great by itself, chances are it won't work in the mix, won't fit. It will either stick out or you just won't be able, it'll cover up other instruments. You just won't be able to make it work well. So the best thing I've found is what a lot of people do is, just EQ 2 instruments at a time, make sure that you can hear them distinctly, make sure one doesn't cover the other one up, and you should be good to go. That's the fastest way I've found to get really good mixes together with your EQ. Okay, next one. From Brian, do you always mix in the box? Yes. And even when I'm in the studio with the console, I mix mostly in the box. What will happen is I'll still use the console, but I won't do much on it. And I'll use it, mostly just for the sound. So I'll bus certain instruments, certain tracks, certain elements out into the console and then use the mix bus there. And it sounds a lot bigger and always sounds a lot better. But the majority of the mix and everything is done inside the box. Why? Well, first of all, these days, everybody wants to fix their mixes later. So you, believe me, if you the old days of trying to replicate a mix and what you did, no matter how good your documentation was, it was just one of those things that no one ever wanted to go through. It would take you the better part of a day to reproduce a big mix with a lot of outboard gear and everything. And then you'd still find that you weren't exactly right most of the time. So now it's better to do it in the box because at least you know it's going to come back the same way for the most part. So yeah, I always mix in the box. The other thing is I much prefer the automation in the box to console automation, which I never did like. So yeah, I do mix in the box. Let's see, from Byron. All of these tricks to add width in a track, how many different instruments would use them on a song? In other words, if placed on many instruments, will that defeat the purpose since everything is now wide? Yes, you don't want everything to be wide. What, and you're talking to the many mixing tricks that basically put things in stereo. Well, stereo doesn't mean hard left and hard right panning. And I don't know many people that actually do that. As a matter of fact, most mixers I know stay out of hard left and hard right. And the farthest they'll go is 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. And so what you'll do is you'll go anywhere in between there. Even if you did, let's say, 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, it doesn't seem like much, but does add some width, and it does add some depth that you won't get, a 3D effect that you won't get any other way. So that's what you'll do with a lot of these effects. You might do something like 11 and 2, something like that. And you'll find that you'll open everything up and it will feel a lot better. Like, for instance, if you're panning two things left and right, you might want to do 11 and 2 and 10 and 1 o'clock. And then you'll find, you'll have some width that won't be too wide and it'll feel good. So yeah, you won't want to do this on everything, because there are certain instruments that just sound better in mono in terms of how they fit in the mix. So yeah, don't stereoize everything. It actually makes it harder for you. Second question: would you make certain things really wide while keeping other things perhaps a bit less via controlling the pan of the returns? Yeah, I mean, that's a way to do it. You if you have one thing that's really wide at 9 and 3, for instance, you probably don't want to have something else at 9 and 3. The reason why is suddenly you're going to find that there's going to be less clarity in both instruments. So you try to find spaces within the stereo spectrum that you can pan things to give everything its own clarity, and it will just sound better. It will sound layered, and that's what you want to do. Finally, is there a good panning chart, standard panning chart? No, except for one thing. Drums, there are two ways to pan them. You can pan from the audience perspective, meaning how you pan them the way you're looking at them from the audience, or from the drummer's perspective, which means how the drummer hears the drums panned. And those are the two ways to do it from either perspective. I use the audience perspective. Most people do, but that doesn't mean it's the right way all the time. Use whatever way feels best to you. Okay, next one. I don't understand. This is from Ming. I don't understand that longer release gets more body. What does that mean? Okay, I think there's a language problem here, Ming. Ming is from Beijing. Um, a longer release sets the decay longer and basically makes the instrument fuller sounding. So if you wanted to make it sound very short, and you want to emphasize the transient, you'd make the release shorter. And if you want to make it fuller, you make it longer. And a lot of times we'll do this with the snare drum. So for instance, we'll lengthen the release on the snare drum to make that fuller and to make it fill up space that it wouldn't ordinarily do. And that fills up our mix as well. So that's the attack and release controls on a compressor. And that's what we're talking about here, attack and release on a compressor. They're very important. And sure, you can make great mixes without playing with those controls, but chances are it'll sound better if you learn how to use those. And of course, there's lots in 101 mixing tricks that goes over that every time we use a compressor, and I always show you about the attack and release. So just go back and it's kind of some of the extra stuff you get with all the mixing tricks. Okay, this is a question that came from someone in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And I'm sorry, I can't read Arabic, so I don't know what your name is. If you're on now, please give me a heads up. What is your setting for sample rate and bit depth when recording vocal? Well, it's the same as the rest of the track. You're not going to make it any different. So if you set the track resolution originally of 4824, that's what you're going to record the vocal at. You're not going to change it. The question keeps on coming up, what's the best sample rate? Most people I know use 9624. They don't go any lower than that. And there's a couple reasons. It does sound better, but sometimes you can't really tell the difference, especially on certain types of music. Really loud compressed metal, for instance, speed metal and stuff, you might not hear the difference between 96 and 48K. The more open, the fewer instruments, the more you'll hear this. What I find, well, the best reason for doing 96K is for archival purposes, because you don't know when 96K, might be the standard for all streaming. I think it's going to be coming soon enough. But what will happen is that will be what they're going to ask for, and you'll be sorry if you haven't recorded all your stuff at 96K. I personally like 192. I heard a huge difference between going from 96 to 192. The real problem is it takes a lot of horsepower, and a lot of times you cut your horsepower in half still with what we have here, and a lot of plugins don't work at 192K. But boy, I've done the test, believe me, between 48 and 96 and 192, and you could really hear the difference. At 192, it was amazing. So I'm a believer as far as that's concerned. But now I try to record everything at 96K. And like I say, pretty much everybody I know does that as well. From Mike, what are the two microphones that you would have to record acoustic guitar, and why? I think I've said this before. I'm not hung up on microphones. I have a bunch that I like, and I own a bunch myself. But if I go to a place, I'll use whatever they have and I'll make it work. I'm just not hung up on it. I know I can make it sound good regardless what the microphones are, so it doesn't bother me a whole bunch. In this case, what I would do is, and two microphones is that's really good to have two different ones. If the acoustic guitar is bright, it's real bright, you might want to tone it down a little bit by using a microphone that's duller. So you might want to use something that's dynamic, for instance, on it. And if it's a dull sounding acoustic, you might want to go the opposite way and have something that's really bright sounding. So you might want y- um, a, a small diaphragm mic that captures the transients better, something like that. So, that's what I would do. I'd have a dull and a bright sounding microphone, and that works for just about everything, by the way. If you have something that really sounds up, you have a banjo, for instance, a banjo you have to record. Well, chances are you don't want a bright microphone in that because you're just going to make it more brighter and more, it's going to stick out more in the track. So there's a good reason there. So you use a duller microphone that will sound better. So that's kind of the idea. My favorite microphones, it depends. It depends on the track, it depends on the player, and it especially depends on the instrument. Sometimes it'll be nice to use large diaphragm microphone. Sometimes a small diaphragm microphone will work, and I'll usually pick a small diaphragm mic. And I'll start with a KM84, which is actually it's a duller sounding small diaphragm microphone. If I have it around, or KM184, that's a Neumann. And I like AKG's 451s, which is a brighter small diaphragm microphone. I like those as well, but it really depends. Okay, next one. I see we have a lot of questions coming in. Keep those questions coming. I'll get to them soon. Another from Byron. What's your opinion regarding internal effects on VSTs, on plugins, he means, while mixing? I produce more electronic dance music and use a lot of synths, so many of the sounds already have internal effects on them. Would you advise to turn off all the internal effects and then use well, okay, what he's saying is, should you use the internal effects on your synths or not? And I would say all these questions always come out the same, which is basically it depends. And it depends on your track, and it depends on the arrangement, and it depends on the sound you're looking for. For instance, if you happen to dial up a synth sound and it just sounds amazing, that's what I would use. If it has effects on, I would just go with it and not worry. If you don't like the sound of the effects, I would turn them off, and then I would go and I'd add new ones. I'd add them from scratch. A lot of times, the stereo is kind of like false stereo. Uh, and what that means is you get a dry track that sounds really good, and then they have a really modulated track on the other side. And a lot of times it's better off to just turn that track off, and then when you use one of the 101 mixing tricks, there's a lot of them there, and to make it into stereo. So that's what I do. Chances are, most of the time, I would create my own effects rather than using the built-in ones. But there are times when the built-in ones are great. There's also times when I just augment the sound. So, for instance, and what comes to mind is a synth pad, for instance. You have a synth pad, and usually it has a lot of reverb on, and I'll keep that if I can. What I'll do is just add some additional reverb to make it sound deeper and push it a little farther back in the mix sometimes. So it's a combination. Generally speaking, though, yeah, I'm going to turn the effects off. I'm going to add my own, but not always. Okay, next question. When given, this is from Charles, when given closed mic drum tracks and no room mics, what would you suggest is a good way to generate a couple of tracks that would accurately simulate room mics that are placed several feet away from the drum kit? Well, first of all, it never bothers me if there's drum mics or there's room mics or not. Again, I feel I can make it sound really good without drum mic or without room mics. So if they're there, great, I'll use them. If they're not, I'm okay with it. I'll just use maybe another reverb, and the reverb might be a short room sound, and I'll play with that until I get what I want. So I know I can always make it sound good using that. There are some good, really good room simulators. The Ocean Way room simulation from UAD is fantastic. So that's always a good one to fall back on. But again, just a separate reverb with a room sound or even a short plate sound, but really short underneath the second. That it's not the same thing, but it will kind of give you what you want. Um, Sometimes what you can do is you can take the overheads, and this is a trick, and maybe it's something I should have in 101 mixing tricks. Just something I thought of now. It's what you can do is make a copy, a duplicate of your overhead tracks. And this works especially if the overheads are high in the air. If they're not, it might not work as well. But then you want to compress the snot out of them. 20 to 1 and, 20 to 30 dB of compression. And that will give you some interesting ambience as well that you might be able to use. So that's a real good one. I have to make a note here about that. Overhead room ambience. Okay. This will be an upcoming bonus trick. Next one. Is there a way to send mixes to clients? This is from Kurt. Is there a way to send? Oh, also, the last couple actually come from the 101 Mixing Tricks Facebook group. And there's a number of really good suggestions, especially on this one. So if you want some great suggestions, if you have a question, post on there and I'll answer you back, but there'll be some other people, and there's always been some, great give and take on that. And there's, things I learned as well. So, and some great ideas. So please use that because it's a great resource. Okay, Kurt asks, is there a way to send mixes to clients without letting them actually download them, especially when full payment hasn't been made yet? This is based on getting half payment to start mixing, and the client pays the other half upon completion. I've heard stories of people releasing mixes that were not fully paid for. Yeah, that happens. The higher up the food chain you go, and the more reputable people that you're working with, that happens less. If you're having with a label, they're slow in paying, but they will pay usually. There's a couple ways to do this. The way that and I haven't done this. I've usually trusted people and I haven't gotten burnt, but I know a lot of other people that do this. And that's put every 30 seconds, put 2 seconds of pink noise in. And that happens on certain plugins as well when you haven't paid for them, by the way. They do that. But that works great on a mix. Somebody else mentioned, and this came from the group, Facebook group, that leave the click track on when you give them the mix, and that's a real good one. Another good one is don't give them a mix to download. Just give them a stream. Put it up on SoundCloud or there's a lot of places you can put it, and just let them stream it so they can hear it, and they don't get the full download, especially the high res download, the full resolution download, until they pay you. So there's a couple of ways right there that will work. The best thing is go with clients you trust if you can. It's easier said than done, I understand, especially when you're getting started. From Anthony, any recommendations for a nice mic preamp that will go perfect with my Blue Bottle microphone? I'm currently using an Avalon 737. I don't know if tube on tube is a good idea. I record mostly hip hop. It's something about the Avalon 737 that hip hop producers really like that piece. And if you use it and like it, good for you. It never worked for me for some reason. I've tried it in the past, and it just never seemed to work. Um, it seemed like it was good at a lot of different things, and it wasn't great at any single one. That being said, in the hip hop community, that's like the preamp to use, the channel strip in a box to use. Uh, Tube on tube, it's not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, you've heard it for years and years and years. When go back to the 50s and 60s, when that's all we had, and even the into the late 70s, when all we had was tube gear for the most part. Well, I shouldn't say the 70s, the 50s and 60s anyway. Everything was tube, and those are some of the best sounding records we have ever had. So I would never worry about having too many tubes in the signal chain, regardless what kind of music you use. If it sounds good to you and it works on the track, what more do you want? Don't overthink it. Think something like this, especially gear. I want to tell you again, if you're not aware, I'm doing a mixing workshop. That's Saturday and Sunday, May 14th and May 15th. There's still a couple of spaces left. It's limited to 10 people, and there's still a couple spaces left. And let's see. Yeah, cool studio in Hollywood. We're going to have some guests. Normally it was $14.97, and there's an early bird special that makes it $9.97 for you guys. Since you're part of 101 Mixing Tricks, we're going to do something special. It's $7.47. It's half price. But what you have to do when you go to BobbyOCourses.com, you'll see it there. Use early mix as a coupon code, and that will give you the price. We're going to have a lot of fun on that. It's going to be good, and you're going to love the studio as well. So go to BobbyOwsinskiCourses.com, use the coupon code early mix. Well, first of all, at Courses, you're going to see the mixing workshop there. Live Q&A, here we go. And we already have a bunch of questions. Here's from Kevin. Is there an advantage in mixing with headphones as opposed to without headphones? Yes and no. God, I hate giving these answers that are both. Here's the advantage. You can hear little things that you can't hear on speakers, especially with panning, and especially noises and clicks and pops and things like that. If you have too many of those things, you find that the mix gets kind of dirty sounding, and it gets it's not as distinct. So that's why most mixers will go through and using the tricks, the editing tricks, the bonus course that comes with 101 Mixing Tricks. Using those editing tricks, they'll go in and they'll clean everything up. And using headphones is the best way to hear all that. So that's one reason. Most of the time, you're better off with speakers. And the reason why is it will translate better to more different playback scenarios. Headphones, when you tend to get a mix on headphones, it tends to only work on headphones. Now, I'm not saying that you can't learn how to use them to make them work on everything, but you just have to it's a fact of life that most of the time what you hear on speakers is going to work better on more playback devices. So I would still, no matter what, check it on a bunch of different things. Now, you don't have to have great speakers. That's one thing. Just understand what they sound like. So play back some stuff that you think sounds great. Learn what it sounds like and try to make your mixes sound like that. It doesn't matter what you're using. I mean, you can use a pair of $10 crappy computer monitors, and believe me, I use that to check my mixes too. I just have these no-name $10 stereo speakers, computer speakers, and I check my mixes on those. If it sounds good on those, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's kicking on everything else, and it just does not work on those speakers. And I'll make sure I go back, and it's usually the low end. It's usually the bass that I don't have right. And I'll go back and I'll tweak it so it works on that. So, again, try to use a combination. If you're going to use headphones, try to use something else as well. And it doesn't matter what it is. Try to use something else. Or get a small, and the speakers don't have to play loud. That's the other thing. People are afraid to, wake up the family, wake up the neighbors, whatever the case. You don't have to play loud. And again, I'm not sure which trick it is, but if you look in module 1, there's a trick for playing at different levels where you might play, and again, this is a way that a lot of us use. You When you're starting the mix and you're trying to get the low end, you crank it up, and you it's the only time during the mix you really crank it, and that will help you get the low end. But after that, you're at a kind of moderate level for the most of the mix, and at the end, it finishes up where it's really quiet, where you bring it down to whisper level. So again, that's a very effective way to making your mixes work on everything. And again, it helps if you can crank them up, but it's not absolutely necessary. Okay, from Johnny. When you pan an instrument or vocals, do you pan the effect to the same pan setting? And where would you set these controls? Well, it depends. Here we go again. Let me give you a couple scenarios. Uh, Many times you want to separate them. You want to spread that to give it some width. So if you have something that's panned to 1 o'clock, you might want to pan the effect to 11, let's say, and that will give it some width. Plus, it will stay out of the way of the vocals. With vocals, what you tend to like to do is keep keep most of the sound in the middle, in the center, and give them some width by spreading out the effect. And the effect may not be spread out too far. It might be at 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock, or it might be 10 and 2, or 9 and 3. It's not. It doesn't have to be spread out far to give it the effect that you're looking for. Many times, there are times when you keep the effect exactly on top of it. And usually and here we go. Each mix is different. Each arrangement is different. Sometimes it just works that way better, where you can hear the effect better, because if you pan it someplace else, it gets stepped on. There's something covering it up. So you can hear it better if it's sitting right behind the dry instrument. So I hate to say that it depends, but it does. It depends on your mix. And that's why it's always good to not feel like you're locked into one thing. You have to try the different possibilities. And this is why mixes take a long time to do, because you're trying different things all the time. And you'll say, okay, if I leave the effect in mono and I leave it right behind this instrument or this vocal, this is what it sounds like. What would happen if I pan it out a little bit? And okay, what if I pan it the other way? What if I pan it like this? And you might try 3 or 4 different ways. And before you find what you're looking for that works in the mix, because there's no one thing that works in every mix. I wish it were the case, but that's not true. I hope I helped you, Johnny. Tomas, what's your experience mixing more than one mic and kick? Oh, yeah, that happens most of the time anymore. Um, I don't know. This kind of started mid 80s where most of the mixes you'd get in, where most of the tracks that you do would always have two mics on the kick. There'd be one inside the kick drum, and that would be more for the snap, and there'd be one outside the kick drum that would be more for the body. And then, into the 2000s, people started to use a sub kick. So you might even have three mics on the kick drum. Generally speaking, most of the sound comes from the inside mic. So the mic that's looking at the beater inside the drum, the kick drum, most of your sound comes from that. And everything else is augmented. So if you have a sub kick or if you have an outside mic, you're not using a whole lot of that. Now, again, there may be exceptions, but most of the time you're not using a lot of that. You're bringing it up until you can hear it and it feels good. And if it gets to the point where it's kind of like 50-50, so 50% inside, 50% outside, that may be too much. Usually, always, the inside is the majority of the sound. Again, there are times when that might change, but usually that's the way it works. So yeah, I mean, we see this more and more. There's two mics in the kick drum. It's not a bad thing. With the sub kick, especially sub kick, you have to be very careful with, and usually that's somewhere around 10%, because if you add too much more, it gets too big and too woofy. So you just barely bring that up, and just about the time you feel it, begin to feel it, that's about right. Again, it depends on the type of music, the genre of music, the arrangement, the player, the instrument, all those things. Okay, from Stan, I have drum tracks. Let's see, one bass drum, snare, chop, and bottom, hi-hat, toms, and two overheads. The problem is the ride. It's way too low in volume. What he does is copy the overhead tracks to new tracks, just cut all the frequencies to isolate the ride. It works, but I'm wondering if I'm creating a phase mess. Yeah, you probably are, but you know what? If it works, that's what you have to do. Most of the time, well, here's how it works when you're tracking drums, and I'm assuming that you didn't track these, Stan. Almost always anymore, engineers will be listening, especially for the ride, because most of the time it does get lost. Not all the time, but most of the time. Now, the exception to this is if you rent a kit from like Drum Paradise or Drum Doctors or someplace like that. Usually what they'll do is they'll make sure that all of the cymbals are matched in level, so you don't have that problem. Or if you have, somebody somebody who has a lot of studio experience, that has, really good recording drums, and they always understand, what they need for cymbals. Where you have a problem is when you get someone that's not used to being in the studio but plays a lot live, and they bring in their live cymbals, and usually live cymbals are really heavy and they're loud, and they're made to last a long time. And they're, not made to sound good as much as, last a long time, take a beating. And that's when you find the mismatches happen. So the best thing, and what you're doing, you're trying to put a Band-Aid on the mix. You're doing what I would do. Definitely. I would do one of two things. I'd either automate the parts in the ride is playing, because usually on that side of the kit, it may be, well, see, you have problems, because if you bring that microphone up, you may also bring the tom mics and the ambience up, and it might sound imbalanced. But sometimes you can get away with just bringing that particular mic up when the ride is playing and automating it in such that when the crash hits, it goes back down. But, again, your way of doing it, would work as well. I would look at the phase, though. I would go in and just look at the tracks and make sure they're lined up correctly. Look at the waveform, make sure everything is lined up. Hans Eric, he says, mix with headphones. Waves NX Virtual Mix Room really sounds like speakers. Yeah, you know what? You're right. I've tried that for my last mixes, and it's amazing. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's true. They did a great job with that. And you're going to be using it soon no matter what, because what I've been finding is most people that are mixing for virtual reality, which there's not a lot of them, everybody uses that. And I was just talking with a bunch of people over the weekend that are kind of in the forefront of this, doing VR and AR stuff. And that's almost a must to use. So that's worth getting. And as Hans Eric says, Waves NX, very cool. It's a virtual mix room. Any other questions that we have here, guys? I don't see anything else coming up. Once again, I want to remind you about the Facebook group. Closed group. It's only for you guys. So go to Facebook and just do a search, 101 Mixing Tricks, and you're going to find it. And once again, I'm very careful about who I let in. If you have a different screen name from the name you signed up with for 101 Mixing Tricks, I might not let you in. And if that's the case, just drop me an email or on the make a comment on 101 Mixing Tricks, and I'll go back and I'll give you an invite. So if there's no other questions, it doesn't look like there are. Remember that there's going to be a replay of this. It's going to be exactly the same as what you've heard today. So you'll get an email on that tomorrow. You can listen to an exact replay. But again, it's going to be uploaded in the Q&A section that you're going to see on your dashboard, either on the and here's something else I should mention. We're updating 101 Mixing Tricks. Some of you are on the new platform, and most of you are still in the old one. And we're going to be updating you to the new platform soon. It's exactly the same in terms of the tricks and the videos. Nothing has changed there, but the platform's a little bit slicker and it's a little bit cooler. So over time, we'll be doing that. So don't be alarmed if suddenly you're pointed to a different login URL. And thanks very much, everybody. I appreciate you being a member of 101 Mixing Tricks. And, thanks for being on the webinar today. Take care. We're going to see you soon.